The first Nitro, Eric Bischoff did say, was to go head to head and put old Vince away. All right, I don't have anything beyond that, but that is going to be how we kick off this classic review. Instead of pay-per-view, we're doing the rare classic television review, a very historic day in television wrestling history. It's the first WCW Nitro from Monday, September 4th, 1995 at the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This show was nominated by Jay Chip Show over on patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. Yes, it only makes sense that since I covered the last Nitro a couple years ago on the channel, and since I've been dabbling in the mid-90s WCW as of late, then we might as well go back and look at the beginning of the story, the beginning of the Monday Night War as Nitro debuted, actually unopposed in this Monday Night War because Raw was being preempted for the Westminster Dog Show that week, so actually a smart piece of strategy by Eric Bischoff and WCW to run the first episode, this first hour of prime real estate on Monday nights, unopposed. As the story goes, Bischoff was in a meeting with Ted Turner, and Turner asked him point blank, how can we make WCW competitive against the World Wrestling Federation? And Bischoff apparently blurted out, well, they need to have a time slot going head to head with Monday Night Raw. And so Ted Turner, barely even flinching at that, just kind of goes, okay, let's make it happen. Let's get it done. Let's get that time slot on Monday nights. And that's how Nitro was born. And I have to say, putting the show in the Mall of America for the first episode is a really just genius move. This is a very iconic piece of wrestling history for so many reasons, and I believe the Mall of America setting is one big reason for that, because it's unique and because wrestling isn't traditionally held in places like a mall. I love that WCW was really, ambitious about having shows take place in different non-traditional venues like the Mall of America for this first Nitro, or as the years went on, they would do shows at those clubs in Florida with the pool surrounding them and whatnot, or a beach, just doing different shows in places, the outside of like arenas or high school gyms or whatever, the other shows were taking place in. That really made it set it apart and made it look truly unique. And I think it's so cool that First Wrestling in Minnesota is actually running shows in the Mall of America again, in that main atrium where the first Nitro took place. Such a cool kind of full circle moment for wrestling to be held there again with all that nostalgia tied in. It's really cool. The show scored a rating of 2.5. As I mentioned, this was debuting unopposed as Raw was off TV that Monday night. You see this opening here filmed at the MGM Disney lot with all the explosions and everything, the wrestlers superimposed on the buildings. You see Vader is in the intro, but he is no longer part of the company plans. He was meant to have kind of a brief babyface run, turning and joining Hulk Hogan's War Games team against the Dungeon of Doom, but also around this time, he got into a backstage fight with Paul Orndorff, and then that was the beginning of Vader's end in the company. He was pretty much taken out of the plans and released soon after, so it's a pity because all that training footage of Vader with Hogan's team practicing moonsaults on crash pads in the war paint, it's all going to go unused after this point. We get those cool opening crane shots. Then we go to our announced team for the evening, Eric Bischoff and former Super Bowl winning Steve Mongo McMichael. This is long before he became a Four Horseman, and he was actually a local Emmy Award winning broadcaster before going on to the show here. He clearly seems to have copied his look from Jesse the Body Ventura, and his first line of commentary on this show, in this opening salvo here on Monday Nitro, I'll never forget it. McMichael says, "This place is apropos, and that don't mean you're digging around the dirt with farm implements, baby." Now, when I tell you that I've spent the better part of the last 25 years with that phrase knocking around in my head as I've tried in vain to figure out what the fuck was he talking about? What does he mean by apropos means digging around the dirt with farm implements? What word did he really mean there? This place is apropos, and I don't mean you're digging around the dirt with farm implements, baby. If it weren't for my horse, I wouldn't have spent that year in college. Then in walks the third man of this commentary team, Bobby the Brain Heenan. He's been wanting to start shit with Mongo for days now, but they go to shake hands, and Mongo actually has an electric buzzer on his hand. Waka waka. Who is this guy, the mask? Heenan eventually demurs for Mongo, and we get on to our first match in Nitro history, Jushin Thunder Liger versus Flying Brian Pillman. You know, a lot of people know that this was the first Nitro match, and when people think about Brian Pillman, they often think about this matchup here with Jushin Liger. But here's a bit of trivia for you. Do you know how Brian Pillman earned the shot at Jushin Liger on this episode of Nitro? By beating Marcus Alexander Bagwell earlier in the week on WCW TV. That means there's an alternate timeline somewhere where the first Nitro match was Buff Bagwell, a young Buff Bagwell versus Liger. And maybe it would be Buff Bagwell's kid who becomes a wrestler, and everyone's like, oh my god, you gotta wrestle Jushin Liger before he retires. The match begins. There's a lot of cool, quick action to start us off. Liger hitting this moonsault out of the corner. Heenan at one point on commentary saying, oh man, these guys could go everywhere in the building. They could go up the escalators and down the escalators. Could you imagine if a match on Nitro on this episode like went that crazy and went, oh my god, we're up in the third tier and everything? Like, oh man, WCW would have won the war outright. One of Mongo's big things in this show, he keeps calling Bobby Heenan Bobby the Stain. That never gets old. Pillman with a Hurricane Rana, and his body moves like a video game glitch. What the hell was happening here? Liger with a lovely surfboard, then a minute later hits that rolling dive off the apron. I think, you know, this was such a good choice to have this match be the first one on this, you know, opening show for Nitro, because it's such a great commercial for WCW. I mean, it's the action between, you know, this guy who's this really exciting light heavyweight going against this person with this global reputation in Liger, and then you have this unique setting, you have this full crowd who are just kind of jazzed to be there, and it's just a very visually pleasing buffet here just in the opening matchup. There's a USA chant as Pillman flies off the top turnbuckle himself. A little bit later, there's a superplex that comes down looking hard. These guys both seem to wrestle like gravity has been turned up just a little bit in this room. It's like some of the landings feel rushed, or it's like they're hitting the ring harder than they normally would, it looks like. I don't know if it's the camera angle or the air pressure in Minnesota or what, but sometimes it felt like that to me. More great back and forth. Nice powerbomb by Liger, followed by the top rope Hurricane Rana. Pillman countering a suplex by rolling through. Liger lands right in his face. We get the cover and the win for Flying Brian. I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. This is a great opening matchup in any venue, in any circumstance, but the fact that this is, again, the opening shot for WCW Nitro is a really good choice, and I think these guys really delivered a nice fast-paced action, really setting the tone for the rest of the night. So there's a reason this match is so highly regarded and so revered historically, because, you know, you only get one chance to make a good first impression, and when they had this matchup to kick off this first episode of this, you know, brave new venture of theirs, you really couldn't ask for a better one. We get a short pre-tape of Sting cutting a promo on Ric Flair earlier in the weekend. Then we go back from commercial, and Bischoff says, we had a chance to catch up with our own WCW champion, Hulk Hogan. Oh, really? You had a chance? Oh, he was so busy that he gave you, the company that hires him, a small morsel, a chance of time to meet up with the ultra-popular WCW champion, Hulk Hogan, reporting from PASTAMANIA, Hogan's licensed pasta bar restaurant at the Mall of America. Hogan mobbed by tons of kids. Jimmy Hart's there with the belt, and Hogan's promo's crazy here. He says, PASTAMANIA has got all my Hulkamaniacs running wild. I've eaten so many Hulkaroos and Hulka-U's. Like, what's a Hulka-U? I kind of feel sorry for Big Bubba, brother, because tonight, brother, first time on TNT, I'm putting the WCW heavyweight title on the line. And with PASTAMANIA running through my brain, who's gonna beat Big Bubba tonight, Hulkamaniacs? I just love that idea of, like, you're eating the pasta and it's like so hype, you're so amped, the pasta's like jolted into your brain, dude. And when I'm done dragging him around the Mall of America and all the PASTAMANIACs are tearing their WCW shirts off, brother, I'm gonna give Big Bubba a big dose of my Hulkaroos, and then I'm gonna body slam him again. So wait a minute, are the Hulkaroos a gift, or is it punishment, or what is it? You know, with little Hulkamaniacs like that, Pastamaniacs all around the Mall of America, Big Bubba, you better tighten up that waistline, brother, because the Hulkster's slim and trim. I've been eating my Pastamania, and what you gonna do in the Mall of America, brother, when Hulk Hogan, Pastamania, and all my Pastamaniacs run wild on you? Holy shit, man. Like, if I had a time machine and can kind of go around from place to place, you know, some people would take that power and try and use it for good, like, you know, oh, try and stop Hitler from happening or whatever. But no, man, I would just use this to go to all the different, like, wrestler licensed restaurants from all the different, like, places in time. Like, I would go to Pastamania. I would go, like, to Jerry Lawler's barbecue place franchise thing he had recently. I would go to, like, Mean Gene's Burgers. Like, oh, man, I'd be hitting up all these places. If content creation was a thing in the mid-1990s, like, man, that's what I would have wanted to do, is like tour the country and try some of these wrestler restaurants. Up next, let's run it back one more time as the Nature Boy Ric Flair takes on Sting. I mean, this has got to be like the most done match in WCW history, right? I mean, when you think about all the different levels of people on the upper and the lower cards and whatnot and repeat matches, when you think about just the number of shows in WCW that I have reviewed for this channel over the years, how many times have we seen Sting and Ric Flair one-on-one? It's been a lot. And so you think about the number of times they would wrestle on television as well as pay-per-view like this. I mean, you know, I talked about it when I reviewed Halloween Havoc a couple of weeks ago. Like, they're good and they have a great chemistry, but man, you think about the number of times those two have faced off together, that it's got to be just, yeah, the most done and repeated matchup in all history in WCW. And if I'm wrong, let me know. But before the match begins, what in the hell is he doing here? Lex Luger has arrived in WCW. The man who everyone assumed was still under WWF contract at this point, turns out he was not. And so in a big coup by Eric Bischoff, he scooped up Luger and was very hush-hush, very secretive about his arrival on this show, and they brought him into the building literally moments before he came out there. And he stood there with his hands on his hips on the aisleway with that iconic shirt that I'm pretty sure he only wore once on TV before this, and then never again, because after an appearance like this, you would want to retire that shirt, and honestly, it belongs in a museum somewhere. But this is a really cool, iconic wrestling moment because of Luger's alleged contract status at the time. Three guys with a lot of history with each other. Luger's not been seen in WCW for a good long time, so this is truly a huge moment for the first Nitro, and it's really one of the biggest shots fired all night. So Luger's moved to the back, and the match begins. Sting is off to the races on Flair, hits the big military presses, like 2 in a row at one point. Both men go tumbling out. We get a couple of more press slams in as many minutes. Back from commercial break, Flair with the all-reliable Beal from the top rope, and we get another press slam by Sting. Wow. Out comes Arn Anderson, who is facing his now former ally Flair at Fall Brawl coming up. Big superplex by Sting. He gets distracted by Arn, and he takes a chop block by Flair. Flair gets the figure 4 locked in, using the ropes blatantly for leverage, but he refuses to let go. The referee counts him out. Then after the bell, Arn gets Flair off of Sting and squares up to him. They trade blows and fight their way back up the ramp, but the drama is not done yet. Scott Norton has now shown up and yells at the announcers. What does he want? He has papers of some kind. He and Mongo get into each other's faces. Then Randy Savage turns Norton around and gets in his face, and they're saying, what are we waiting for? And Savage goes, we're not waiting for nothing. Let's do it right now. So Savage gets in the ring. Bischoff tells Norton he's got to leave and warns him he'll never wrestle in WCW if he fights Savage here. And then we go to commercial. You know, when you look at this moment, this impact of Scott Norton's arrival in WCW, and then you kind of extrapolate further into like what happens in his WCW career and how little is ultimately gained, it's like, kind of a missed opportunity there. Still a very chaotic moment and adds to that whole unpredictability factor of Nitro. I'm going to give the match itself, though, 2 stars out of 5. You know, when you've been watching a fair number of ultimately inconsequential Sting and Flair matchups for research and review purposes over the last several months, you start to compare them. And this one definitely feels like the weakest of the ones I've seen in a little bit, but it's still Sting and Flair. You know what you're going to get. It did feel a bit one note with all the military presses, more than usual, that Sting was doing. But obviously, the story here is about Lex Luger's arrival, his return to WCW. WCW and the chaos that moment caused. And it's also crazy to think about the story of how Lex Luger got signed, how Sting had to put a good word into him to Eric Bischoff, and that Bischoff didn't want to sign Luger because of, his past, behavior in the before times and what his reputation was like. And he lowballed Luger, gave him a very low offer. But Luger was willing to put the work in and kind of, rebuild his reputation. And ultimately that paid off because he ended up getting paid a lot more money down the line in WCW. But it's very interesting how, again, think about those alternate timelines when things might have worked out or things leaned one way or the other. Like, imagine if Nitro didn't have this Lex Luger moment. I think that's one of the biggest things about this opening episode of Nitro. And if you didn't have that, then I think maybe this episode would have been a bit lacking. Look at this, a high package coming up for Sabu, and boy, talk about a guy who was just way ahead of his time in that company in WCW. He had a very short-lived run there, but it was pretty explosive, pretty memorable. But yeah, typical matchup you'd see for Sabu is not the kind of wrestling they had in WCW. And that's probably a big reason why he didn't last there very long, honestly. After the break, Mean Gene Okerlund congratulates the winner of the Harley-Davidson Softail giveaway. Then Bischoff plugs this weekend's episode of Saturday Night featuring Johnny B. Bad versus Dick Slater, Sting and Macho Man versus the Blue Bloods, and a special update on Fall Brawl. Then we get a pre-taped promo of VK WALLSTREET, Mike Rotundo, the former IRS, making his return to WCW under this gimmick here, and says, in the past, people have talked and talked about the new generation. But in Mr. WALLSTREET's estimation, the new generation is nothing more than the few generation, Which is why I'm here in WCW, because it's about power. It is about money. And right now, where the greatest wrestlers in the world are, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Sting, Vader, now you've added to the list Mr. WALLSTREET. Oh, and I'm sure the IRS is going to be watching me real close. But that's fine, because as you go down the road in WCW, people are going to know for sure that Michael WALLSTREET is a real player. This $1 Million Man cosplay have an ass. What is this look? It's like, hey, we don't have the rights to have Mike Rotundo be IRS, so we'll just have him be the guy he worked with in the last company. It's like he literally stole Ted DiBiase's entrance jacket from his gimmick closet before cutting this promo. And hey, Mike Rotundo's a great wrestler, but he's no Ted DiBiase, and he definitely doesn't have the character or the charisma or the gravitas to be a $1 Million Man character. But he's VK WALLSTREET. He's also Michael WALLSTREET. Just keep that clear and consistent. So yeah, we'll see what happens with this character here. Also, this is just kind of the TV nerd in me, but I always love watching old 4x3 shows on HD, the 16:9 monitors, and you can see the live shot underneath the VTR, the tape playing of Rotundo's promo as they're setting the wide shot up underneath. Just little things like that make me smile. Main event time for the WCW Championship as Big Bubba challenges Hulk Hogan. And I love the commentary during Hogan's entrance where Mongo goes, "You gotta be impressed," and after a beat Heenan just goes, "No." But this will be an easy night for the Hulkster. Just let him and the Boss Man work together again. But man, imagine if they could do half the kind of match they did in the steel cage on Saturday night's main event. Oh man, that match was fire. I'm really glad nobody does that headlock thing that Boss Man or X-Pac did. It just looks so weird. I tried that once in wrestling training and felt so awkward about it. I never did it again. Because what is this? What does that do? Just, he kind of tussles his hair a little bit. Hogan is full of pasta and full of rage as he rains down the punches, only to take a thumb to the eye. All the pasta in the world can't prepare your eyes for that. Boss Man takes a punch and just deactivates for a few seconds, but he's able to come back and sit on Hogan, and Heenan says, "That'll make you cough up your pasta." Bubba slides out, harasses Jimmy Hart at ringside. That allows Hogan to come back and choke Bubba with Jimmy's jacket. Jimmy, by the way, has some of the loudest pants I've seen in a long time as Hogan makes his comeback. This crowd at this point seems really tired, not cheering cheering, not booing a lot of stuff. They're just kind of there. Like, I don't know if this crowd is full of people who, like, you know, don't see a lot of wrestling and are just getting tired and like, oh man, I was only here for the original Cookie Company and now I'm sitting here watching this wrestling show. I guess we could stick around, you know, or if it's just people, it's just that time of day. People aren't used to being in the mall that late on a Monday. I don't know. Bubba goes for a charging attack, but misses the mark. Hogan walks right into a boss man slam, but fuck it, he starts hulking up anyway. The punches, the boot, the leg, and the win for the Hulkster. I give it 2 stars out of 5. You know, it's a typical Hulk Hogan conquering hero kind of match. And like I said, he and Big Bubba, Big Boss Man, they worked so many times together that this is a nice, easy, safe choice. It's a match that plays to the Hulkster's strengths and he knows what he's getting into when he wrestles Bubba. So yeah, everyone wins in this one here. And then as that match ends, I'm kind of looking at the timeline. We got 6 minutes of show left. What do we got going on here? And sure enough, the Dungeon of Doom show up. The Taskmaster, the Zodiac, the Shark, Kamala, and the man called Ming, the face of terror. But then in comes Lex Luger. He helps clean house. We get Luger and Hogan back to back and they turn around. They have a face-off. Oh shit, what a moment this is. Because man, you think about the timeline here and where Lex Luger just came from and just Luger's career the last couple of years, where he was kind of supposed to be built up as the heir apparent to Hulk Hogan, and then he's there in the ring with the man himself, the man that, you know, for one reason or another, he just couldn't reach those expectations in the WWF. And now he's back on his home turf at WCW where he first came up, and he sees Hulk Hogan there. He's there now. Like, this is a really cool moment when you look at just kind of what the main event makeup was like for the last couple of years in across wrestling, and especially the WWF and where they are now in WCW. Definitely full circle moment. Then Sting and Randy Savage come out to defuse the situation. I love how Savage is trying to communicate with his hand signals as he's breaking it up. Then we go to commercial break and we come back and we get one more promo for Fall Brawl, and the voiceover guy says, "The battle against muscular dystrophy rages on." And I know that they were saying that a proceed of the sales and the profits for Fall Brawl would go to the MDA, but I'm like, man, like, is there going to be some wrestlers who are actively like wrestling as the representation of muscular dystrophy here? The promo is still out of date though, because they're still saying Vader is going to be part of Hogan's team. We go back from the break and MGO is in the middle of the ring trying to sort all this out, and Hogan screams, "What are you doing here, Luger? You got no business in my backyard." And Luger says, "People say you're the #1 wrestler in the world today. You wear that WCW belt around your waist. You know what? That makes you the only world's heavyweight champion, and I'm here to take that belt. That's why I'm here." And he says, "I'm sick and tired of playing with little kids. I want to play with the big boys, and that's where the big boys play. And you're a big boy, and I want to fight you for your big boy belt." And then Hogan, in his kind of rebuttal promo, he kind of simultaneously like builds Luger up and also kind of tears him down, where he's like, "As good as you are," because, you know, the way he says some of these phrases, it makes it sound like I'm going to insult you after I say, "As good as you are, da-da-da." But then he turns around and says, like, "I agree. You also should get a shot. So next week, we're going to have a title match. So put your big, stinky palm of yours out and shake my hand, and I'll put the WCW on the title on the line next Monday in Miami." That's still, I love how Hogan, he would always describe things as stinky. And like, that would have thrown me off. If I was talking to somebody and they were like, "Man, put your big stinky hand out there and let's shake on it," I'd be like, "Wait, what, you think my hand smells? Like, why would you say that?" So we get Bischoff, Heenan, and Mongo wrapping things up, and there's Pepe all dressed up as the show fades to black. But what a killer end to the show. The cliffhanger, the confrontation, you know, what's going to happen next week. I think that was all pretty well done in the grand scheme of things. And again, it's really fascinating to consider that Bischoff didn't even want Luger there at the beginning, and now it's like he's the crux of this major angle to close off this first show, this first Monday Nitro. And of course, we know the history of Nitro from this point on. They're going to go on for many more years after this point. They're going to expand to 2 hours, eventually to 3 hours. And there will be that wonderful 83-week run that they go on where they beat WWF Raw in the ratings. And they eventually, you know, run out of business and go out and be done by March of 2001. And I have covered a lot of the end of WCW, of the WCW programming in '01. And if you want to check that out, I've got all that stuff in the playlist for the Classic classic pay-per-view reviews, including the final WCW Nitro. So that being said, I'm going to give the very first episode of Monday Nitro a B+. This is a great episode of television. It breezes by, 45 minutes online, and it's just, a lot of great big moments happening here. They're really swinging for the fences with the kind of matches they have and, the kind of stuff, the moments they have. Again, that moment of Lex Luger debuting, that just immediately legitimized the show itself. It legitimized WCW further. It showed that anything can happen during this time period, and a lot of things did. Anything could happen and often did around this time. And so, yeah, this is the beginning of what's going to be a truly magical time for wrestling fans that ever since then, people have wanted to see come back in some shape or form. I'm just really glad that Twitter wasn't around when the Monday Night War was happening. But what did you think of the first episode of Nitro? And how about this review? Let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and of course, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. Well, folks, we're out of the WCW wilderness for the rest of 2024. You won't hear me reviewing a WCW show until the end of January. So it's going to be a bit of a ways. You have a bit of a respite from this company for a bit. But I will say, in 2 weeks' time, we've got the last classic review of 2024. We are jumping a few years ahead into the timeline, going back to the WWF. It's a very interesting time, the end of 1998. The Rock has been coronated as the corporate champion, and Mankind is still nipping at his heels. Then you have Steve Austin fighting The Undertaker in a Buried Alive match. That and so much more when I look at Rock Bottom 1998. But until then, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.